Your cybersecurity solution is here. Introducing Pentester's Advanced Cybersecurity Suite. Ready for peace of mind? Try it for free. No credit card required. Pentester.com.
There's probably a gazillion dollars worth of money here between all of them. I mean, Tommy Gambino, multi-millionaire. Joe Butch, a millionaire. Paul Castellano, multi-millionaire. Jimmy Brown, multi-millionaire. I really never saw him out and about, to tell you the truth. He pretty much stayed in his club in Brooklyn, and there was a restaurant up the block from his club, but he was very close to Sammy the Bull. I know when Paul Castellano got whacked, he didn't bust a grape. He didn't say a word, to be perfectly honest. The Colombo family actually got over on us. Carmine Persico and his guys, they snuck my brother's friend and made out they didn't know.
Good.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Ruggiano. I want to welcome everybody to Reformed Gangsters. If you like our content, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell, and also become a Patreon member. It's only $5 a month. It's at a great price. It helps with my content, and you'll get some private stories because, like I said earlier, we're going to limit the stuff we put out on YouTube. It's going to be recovery-based and some personal stuff, but the meat of everything is going to be on Patreon. So, you know, become a Patreon member and get early access to the newest content. So tonight, I want to talk about, so there's a YouTube channel out there. I don't want to mention the name. It's two guys, don't know who they are once I start talking. For some reason, these two individuals, all they do is bad rap me and Mikey Francis and Sammy the Bull, who are very dear friends of mine, the two of them. And it's okay, you know, listen, we all got to earn a living. If that's what you need to do to create content, talk bad about other people, you know, I'm fine with that. You know, it was hurtful in the beginning, but, you know, I have enough recovery in me and enough spirituality and humility to let it go, you know, because it's wrong. They're wrong. You know, I don't make stories up. I don't, you know, fluff things up. I might make a mistake here and there, get a date mixed up, get a face mixed up. I'm human. But I don't fabricate stories. I'm not Forrest Gump. I don't put myself in situations that I wasn't involved in. I like that too. That was a good one when they called me Forrest Gump. I got a kick out of that. So these two individuals put out a poll on their channel. And I like the polls they do. They do some polls. I think it's cool, you know, because I checked their polls out, you know. And so anyway, they put out a poll the other day. Who is the most unbelievable out of a couple of us? I don't want to mention the other people's names. You know, I'm sure they'll have something to say about it. You know, so they put out a poll with, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 of us on it to their subscribers on their channel. And lo and behold, who came in last, who is the most believable out of these people or on this poll was yours truly, Anthony Ruggiano Jr., who only got 6% of the vote. A little minute piece of the vote. So now their own subscribers told them that I'm believable. The comments, I read their comments. Most of the comments with my name in them were positive for me. So I want to thank them for that. I really appreciate them legitimizing my content because evidently people believe me in spite of what they have to say about us. People still believe me, which I'm very thankful for. So once again, I'm not going to say their name because I can't get their name out of I can't get their name in my mouth because I'll get a bad taste in my mouth. But I want to thank them and I want to wish them well. And I hope their channel thrives. I want to thank them for that poll. And once again, I can't thank you enough. And I also have a feeling they'll try to spin this, and that's okay too. But once again, thank you. So I have a picture here that was sent to us. It's a Gambino portrait. So Who's in this picture? Tommy Gambino's in this picture. Tommy Bellatti's in this picture. These are all captains. Joe Butch is in this picture. Frankie Dapp is in this picture. I liked Frankie Dapp. He was a good friend of ours. They called him Frankie Dapp because he was dapper dresser. He was a captain. Paul Castellano's in this picture, who was the boss at the time. Frankie DeChico's in this picture, who was standing right next to Paul with a big smile on his face. And then we all know what Frankie did. Frankie set Paul up to be killed. And at the far right is Jimmy Brown. There's probably a gazillion dollars worth of money here between all of them. I mean, Tommy Gambino, multi-millionaire. Joe Butch, a millionaire. Paul Castellano, multi-millionaire. Jimmy Brown, multi-millionaire. I think the brokest guy in the picture probably is poor Frankie DeChico. There's another guy in the picture with glasses. He was a captain too. I don't know who that is. It might be Joe Arcuri. I'm not sure who it is. He's got shades on. It might be Joe Arcuri. I'm not too sure. But everybody else in the picture, I know. Tommy Bellotti, Joe Butch, Frankie Dapp, Jimmy Brown, and Frankie DeChico. A lot of people have been asking me questions about Jimmy Brown. You know, what I know about Jimmy Brown, well, he was good friends with Tony Lee and my old man. I met him when I was a kid, you know, when I first started going around with my father. He had a club in Brooklyn, down in Bensonhurst, Bay Ridge. Paul Castellano hung out in there. I believe at one time he was Carlo Gambino's driver. He was very, very tight with Carlo Gambino, very tight with Paul Castellano. I know what I was told by Tony Lee and my own man about him was he had probably the biggest crew out of all the captains in the family at one time. A big, serious money, multi-million-dollar private sanitation. He pretty much was one of the biggest haulers in the city. Brought in millions of dollars. Like I said, had a really big crew, straightened out a lot of guys, straightened out Danny Marino, straightened out a whole bunch of guys. I know he did have a big, big regime for a captain. Very powerful. I really never saw him out and about, to tell you the truth. He pretty much stayed in his club in Brooklyn, and there was a restaurant up the block from his club, but he was very close to Sammy the Bull. I know when Paul Castellano got whacked, he didn't bust a grape. He didn't say a word. You know, he just fell in line with everybody else, and John became the boss. Yeah, you know, he was a gangster, you know, tough guy, big earner. So I had a couple of meetings with him. So the first time I met Paul Castellano in 1977, unfortunately, one of my brother's friends was murdered in 88th Street Park. And it was done by the members of associates of the Colombo family. And they reached out to Paul Castellano and to let him, you know, what jumped off. And Paul sent for my father. And we actually went to Jimmy Brown's club. It was my father, Tony Lee, Nicky Carrazza, who had just, I don't know if he had just got straightened out, or I think they just both got straightened out, him and Lenny DiMaria. And we went to Jimmy Brown's club in Brooklyn. And me and Nicky and Lenny sat at another table, and Tony Lee and my father and Paul and Jimmy Brown sat at another table, and they talked about what they had to talk about. We had to give them a pass. It was a whole big mess. It was just not a good situation for us. We actually really, to be honest, we came out on the short end of the stick, to be perfectly honest. The Colombo family actually got over on us. Carmine Persico and his guys, they snuck my brother's friend and made out they didn't know. It was right across the street from I lived on 88th Street. You know, my father put up a big argument. He wanted to get even, but Paul Castellano ruled that, you know, we had to give them this one, but he told Carmine Persico that he'll never give them another one like that. You know, so we had to give them a pass, and Jimmy Brown was in on that sit down. It was in his club. He was at my wedding, of course, and then later on, a couple months later, in October of '77, I got married at the Lamia on Ocean Parkway. I had over 1,000 guests. That's the same place that my good friend Angel Gotti got married at, the Lamia. She had the same type of wedding, all 3 floors. I'm not saying she copied me. I don't want her to get angry and start attacking me on YouTube, because she does that often. You know, I don't know why. We were good friends at one time, you know, and I'm sorry if, you know, I annoyed her. now. I don't really talk bad about her family. I happen to really care about her family, her children, her father, but that's a story for another day. But we got married at the same place, the Lamia, and of course Paul Castellano came. That was the second time I met him, and he sat at the table with all the captains. And my father brought me over to the table and introduced me. And at that night, actually, I met pretty much every captain in the Gambino family. I mean, I remember Paul Castellano sat at a big table my father had set up for him and all the captains. And I went over and I met her, and Jimmy Brown was there again. If you enjoy my show, please join my Patreon, ask your questions live, and please join my Patreon at reformgangsters.com. Moving forward, all I know about Jimmy Brown is that, when John became the boss, like I said, he didn't bust a grape. He had not, I'm sure he didn't like it. John did it without permission. He was very close with Paul Castellano. His crew was very close to Paul Castellano. I mean, some of the Gambinos are actually under him, under Jimmy Brown. Danny Marino was under him. I know Danny Marino plotted to kill John and plotted to kill John Jr., John's son. So there was some underground friction going on. I heard a story. John Gotti was Napolitan from Naples. Actually, his family and my father and his family, the Gottis and the Ruggianos, come from the same town in Naples. I'm going to try to pronounce it. I may mess it up, but it's called Sant'Agata di Gotti. And I believe that the Gottis took the name of the town when they immigrated to New York, which a lot of families did. It wasn't uncommon. When you got to Ellis Island, the people that would put you, doing the paperwork couldn't pronounce the names, so they just wrote down the name of the town, like Castellano, Sicily, Messina, Sicily, Avellino, Sally Avellino, another captain in the Cajun family, Avellino, Sicily, so a lot of people I know took the name of the town. So I believe the Gotti name came from the town, and they were paisans. And John's father, John Sr., always used to call my father paisan because their families came from the same town in Naples. So John was Napolitan. Jimmy Brown's crew was predominantly Sicilian, which that's the crew now, from what I understand, runs the Gambino family again. The Sicilian fraction took control of the family again because it was Albert, and then was it Sicilian or Napolitan? Albert was Calabrese. I don't remember what Albert Anastasia was. And then Carlo Gambino came in, and he was Sicilian. And there was always friction between the Napolitans and the Sicilians. Let me take a sip of water out of my Reformed Gangster cup. If anybody out there wants to get a cup. So, moving forward, John becomes the boss. He's Napolitan, Jimmy Brown Sicilian. I hear one day Jimmy Brown makes an off-the-cuff remark to John about us Sicilians got to stick together now. Some kind of off-the-cuff remark to John about Sicilian and Napolitan, not realizing that John's Napolitan. So maybe a day or two later, from what I understand, John went to Jimmy Brown's club by himself. Didn't tell nobody where he was going. He got in the car and he drove there. And he got out of Jimmy Brown's car and he walked in Jimmy Brown's club by himself. And everybody's going like, "What? Oh my God! What are you doing? What are you doing here?" Like, he's the boss. He walked in alone. And he took Jimmy Brown outside. And from what I understand, he told Jimmy Brown, "I just want to let you know one thing about that remark you made about the Sicilians. I'm Napolitan." And I heard Jimmy Brown almost like fainted, because Jimmy Brown was knocking the Napolitans. And then, of course, John let it go. But, John put him in check. And John was good at that. He'll put you in check immediately. You know what I mean? And that's my Jimmy Brown stuff. Very powerful Gambino captain for many, many years. Had one of the biggest regimes, maybe the biggest. I really believe, if I'm not mistaken, that he had the most soldiers with him out of all the captains in the Gambino family at one time. And a lot of guys around him later on became captains themselves, So just like my father's crew, he had a lot of guys around him for a soldier, and a lot of guys that he straightened out became captains and bosses and consiglieres later on in life, So, and Jimmy Brown made a lot of money. And then Giuliani took care of all that when Giuliani came in and wiped them all out with the sanitation, took it all away and, locked everybody up. And Eventually, Jimmy Brown got arrested. Sammy testified against him, and that was the end of Jimmy Brown. Now he passed away. Jimmy, you know, Jimmy Brown, when Paul Castellano got clipped, Jimmy Brown had a lot of juice. But Frankie DeChico and Sammy the Bull, that was their neighborhood. That's why they were in the place they were in, to keep the peace with Jimmy Brown. Well, basically with Jimmy Brown's crew, because he had the biggest crew and a very powerful crew with a lot of money. If John would have got clipped, probably Jimmy Brown. If John would have got clipped after Frankie DeChico, Sammy might have had to kill Jimmy Brown. Who knows, But Jimmy Brown would have definitely been in a strong position. That's a good question for me to ask Sammy the Bull. I'm going to ask Sammy that question. He would know better than me.
Here's another hypothetical. If Paul had Jimmy Brown as his underboss instead of Bilotti, would it have still gone down?
Definitely. It wasn't about Tommy Bilotti. It was about the tapes. They were not going to give over those tapes because there was people on those. They were all dealing junk. Angelo was not going to give up those tapes. John was not going to give up those tapes. Tommy Bilotti, that was just a secondary, problem, him becoming underboss. The tapes were the main issue, in my opinion.
A lot of the impression people get from John was he was a little bit of a hothead at times, but this was a time where he heard the statement and then he waited till the next day. That takes restraint and intelligence. Could you describe him more about ways he was like that?
Yeah, what is he going to stop berating Jimmy Brown? He's a powerful guy, he just waited on it, and then he went there by himself. That's the type of guy he was, Things happen. My father, the same thing. He had a beef once with Arnel Delacroce, the underboss. They were out in Manhattan drinking, and they were having a meeting with the underboss of Chicago. Flew into New York, and they went out for dinner. Neil, my father, Tony Lee, a couple of other wise guys, Frankie Martin, and a few other guys, and they were drinking, and they were partying, and I don't know. My father was breaking balls, really just breaking balls, and he hated the underboss of Chicago. I forgot the guy's name. Oh my God! When I heard the story, and the underboss of Chicago said to Neil, "That's how you let your guys talk to you." And but that's the kind of relationship my father had with Neil. They came up together, from the Albert Anastasia days. So, they always broke balls like that. And Neil, Neil reprimanded my father in front of everybody, like embarrassed him in front of everybody, And when they went outside, they were like nose to nose, my father and Neil, and Frankie Martin, this other wise guy, Frankie Martin, got in the middle of them and said, "What, he's crazy? What's going on here? Like, this can't be," and they left. And the next day, my father, by himself, went to the Ravenite, because Neil lived across the street at the time from the Ravenite with his wife and Buddy, his son, before he moved out to Staten Island with his girlfriend. His building was directly right across the street from the Ravenite. And my father went there by himself in the morning and waited in front of the door till Neil came out of his house. And when Neil came out of his house, my father goes, "What's going to happen? What are we going to do?" And Neil, hugged him and said, "What, are you kidding me? Forget about it. It was a misunderstanding." And now Neil was the underboss at the time. And and Neil just told my father, "I love you. I'll always be your captain," even though, because Neil was my father's captain after Tommy Rava disappeared, and Carl made Neil the captain. Carlo Gambino made Neil the captain, and they kissed and made up. But my father always told me that Neil never forgot that my father was ready to fight and die, and Neil never forgot that. And he believes Neil held them back a little bit because of that. But that's a story for another day.